This week we're covering Chapter 13, Personality. Where does personality come from? Personality is a person's characteristic thoughts, emotional responses, and behaviors. Some personality psychologists are most interested in understanding whole persons. A personality trait is a pattern of thought, emotion, and behavior that is relatively consistent over time and across situations. Allport, one of the founders of the field, gave a classic scientific definition of personality: the dynamic organization within the individual of those psychophysical systems that determine the individual's characteristic behavior and thought. The notion of organization indicates that personality is a coherent whole. This organized whole is dynamic in that it is goal-seeking, sensitive to particular contexts, and adaptive to the person's environment. In 1937, Allport published the first major textbook of personality psychology. His book defined the field. He has also championed the study of individuals and established traits as a central concept in personality research. By emphasizing psychophysical systems, Allport brought together two ideas. He highlighted the mental nature of personality, for example, the psycho part of psychophysical, and he recognized that personality arises from basic biological processes, i.e., the physical part of psychophysical. Genetic factors influence the development of personality. There's overwhelming evidence that nearly all personality traits have a genetic component. Across a wide variety of traits, identical twins proved much more similar than fraternal twins. Numerous twin studies have subsequently found that genetic influence accounts for approximately half of the variance, 40 to 60%, between individuals for all personality traits. Identical twins receive more similar treatment than other siblings, and that treatment can explain some of the similarity in personality. Researchers examined correlations between 123 pairs of identical monozygotic twins and 127 pairs of fraternal dizygotic twins in Vancouver, Canada. This chart summarizes some of their findings. These traits, called the Big Five, are discussed further. Adoption studies. Children who are not biologically related and who are raised in the same household as adopted siblings tend to be no more alike in personality than any two strangers. Personalities of adopted children bear no significant relationship to those of adoptive parents. Findings suggest that parenting style may have relatively little impact on personality. Although the small correlations in personality among siblings might imply that parenting style has little effect, this does not mean that parents are unimportant. Similarities in personality between biological siblings and between children and their biological parents seem to have some genetic component. Are there specific genes for personality? Genes predispose us to have certain personality traits associated with behavioral tendencies. In most cases, researchers note the influence of multiple genes that interact independently with the individual's environment to produce general dispositions. Evidence suggests that genes can be linked with some specificity to personality traits. A gene that regulates one particular dopamine receptor has been associated with novelty seeking. Any links between specific genes and specific aspects of personality appear to be extraordinarily small, though. Each person experiences different circumstances that may cause epigenetic changes and the selective expression of certain genes. Temperaments are evident in infancy. Temperaments are biologically based tendencies to feel or act in certain ways. Three personality characteristics that can be considered temperaments are activity level, which is the overall amount of energy and of behavior a person exhibits; emotionality, which is the intensity of emotional reactions; and sociability, the general tendency to affiliate with others. These temperaments have been linked to people's propensities to move to new locations. Do temperament differences exist between boys and girls? A meta-analysis found robust gender differences in temperament in early childhood. Girls demonstrated stronger abilities to control their attention and resist their impulses, while boys were more physically active and experienced more high-intensity pleasure, such as rough and tumble play. There were no temperamental differences in negative emotions, such as being angry, neurotic during childhood. Long-term implications of temperaments. Early childhood temperaments significantly influence behavior and personality structure throughout a person's development. Researchers investigated the health, development, and personalities of more than 1,000 people born during a one-year period. Individuals were examined approximately every 2 years, with 95% remaining in the study through their 38th birthdays. At 3 years of age, they were classified into temperamental types based on examiners' ratings. The classification at age 3 predicted personality structure and a variety of behaviors in early adulthood. Biological evidence suggests that the amygdala, the brain region involved in emotional responses, especially fear, is involved in social anxiety. Researchers investigated the personality development of more than 1,000 people. As shown in these graphs, the individuals judged under-controlled at age 3 were later more likely to be antisocial, to have alcohol problems, and to be criminals than those judged either well-adjusted or inhibited. In each graph, the dotted line indicates the average for the entire sample. All right, methods of psychology, inhibition, and social anxiety. The hypothesis here is people who had an inhibited temperamental style as children are more likely to show signs of social anxiety later in life. The research method. Adults received brain scans while viewing pictures of familiar faces and of novel faces. One group of these adults had been categorized as inhibited before age 2. The other group had been categorized as uninhibited before age 2. 2 regions of the brain were more activated for novel faces. These areas were the amygdala and the occipital temporal cortex. The amygdala is normally active when people are threatened. The occipitotemporal cortex is normally active when people see faces, whether the faces are novel or familiar. The results, compared with the uninhibited group, the inhibited group showed significantly greater activation of the amygdala while viewing novel faces. That activation indicated that when seeing novel faces, the inhibited group showed greater brain activity associated with threat. The results suggest that some aspects of childhood temperament are presented in the adult brain. In particular, biological factors seem to play an important role in social anxiety. What are the theories of personality? The word personality comes from the Latin word persona, meaning mask. During the 20th century, psychologists approached the study of personality from a number of theoretical perspectives. Psychologists' views on personality were based on their individual theoretical orientations. Psychodynamic theories emphasize unconscious and dynamic processes. Sigmund Freud developed many ideas about personality by observing his patients. He believed their problems were psychogenic, caused by psychological rather than physical factors. He came up with the psychodynamic theory. This theory is that unconscious forces determine behavior. The unconscious influence. Freud believed that our conscious awareness was only a small fraction of our mental activity and that most mental processes are unconscious. He defined levels of consciousness. Conscious, these are the thoughts that people are aware of. Preconscious is content that is not currently in awareness, but that could be brought to awareness. And the unconscious, this is material that the mind cannot easily retrieve. In general, these forces and their conflicts are not accessible. Sometimes, however, the information leaks into consciousness. People may accidentally reveal hidden motives when uttering what is known as a Freudian slip. Sigmund Freud theorized that mental activity occurred at the three levels. He believed that much of human behavior was influenced by unconscious processes, which can result in conflict between the three personality structures, the id, the ego, and the superego. Personality consists of these three interacting structures that vary in their access to consciousness. The id, in psychodynamic theory, is the component of personality that is completely submerged in the unconscious and operates according to the pleasure principle. The superego, which is the internalization of societal and parental standards of conduct. And the ego. This is the component of personality that tries to satisfy the wishes of the id while being responsive to the dictates of the superego. A structural model of personality. Conflicts between the id and the superego can lead to anxiety. Defense mechanisms are an unconscious mental strategy that the mind uses to protect itself from anxiety. Much of the theoretical work on defense mechanisms can be credited to Freud's daughter, Anna Freud. Here's a list of common defense mechanisms: denial, repression, projection, reaction formation, rationalization, displacement, and sublimation. You can read through this list of the definition and examples for each to help for clarity. Anna Freud studied defense mechanisms and contributed to the understanding of children's development. Here's a picture of her. Psychosexual development. Early childhood experiences have a major impact on the development of personality. The psychosexual stages, according to Freud, are developmental stages that correspond to distinct libidinal urges. Progression through these stages profoundly affects personality. In each psychosexual stage, libido is focused on one of the erogenous zones. The first stage is the oral stage. It's birth to 18 months. Infants seek pleasure through the mouth. The anal stage, which is from age 2 to 3, learning to control the bowels leads to a focus on the anus. The phallic stage, age 3 to 5, the focus is on the genitalia. Latency stage, children during this stage suppress libidinal urges. Next is the genital stage, adolescence and adulthood. Libidinal urges are focused on the capacities to reproduce and contribute to society. Some people can become fixated at this stage. These personalities are known as oral or anal retentive. Psychodynamic theory since Freud. A number of influential scholars modified Freud's ideas in their own psychodynamic theories. These neo-Freudians include Carl Jung, Alfred Adler, and Karen Horney. Contemporary neo-Freudians focus on social interactions, especially children's emotional attachments to their parents or primary caregivers, the object relations theory. Psychologists have largely abandoned psychodynamic theories, though. Personality reflects learning and cognition. Behavioral psychologists such as B.F. Skinner rejected the idea that personality is the result of internal processes. Instead, behaviorists viewed personality mainly as learned responses to patterns of reinforcement. Over time, psychologists became dissatisfied with strict models of learning theory. A person named Rotter came up with an expectancy value approach. This is the internal-external locus of control. A locus of control is personal beliefs about how much control people have over outcomes in their lives. People with an internal locus of control believe they bring about their own rewards. People with an external locus of control believe rewards and therefore their personal fates result from forces beyond their control. Personal constructs, as developed by George Kelly, is people have personal theories of how the world works. A psychologist named Bandura argued that there are three factors that influence how a person acts. The first is a person's environment. The second are multiple person factors, which include the person's characteristics, self-confidence, and expectations. And three, behavior. Reciprocal determinism. This is a theory that how personality is expressed can be explained by the interaction of environment, person factors, and behavior itself. Bandura proposed that the three factors interact with each other to influence personality: the environment, person factors, and behavior. Humanistic approaches emphasize integrated personal experiences. Humanistic approaches are approaches to studying personality that emphasize how people seek to fulfill their potential through greater self-understanding. Self-actualization is people seek to fulfill their potential for personal growth through greater self-understanding. This is that process. A psychologist named Rogers, he had a person-centered approach, emphasized the importance of people's subjective understandings of their own lives. He encouraged parents to raise their children in unconditional positive regard so that they might become fully functioning people. According to Rogers' theory, personality is influenced by how we understand ourselves and how others evaluate us, which leads to conditions of worth or unconditional positive regard. Trait approaches describe behavioral dispositions. The trait approach is an approach to studying personality that focuses on how individuals differ in personality dispositions. A psychologist named Cattell came up with factor analysis and identified 16 basic dimensions of personality. These dimensions include intelligence, sensitivity, dominance, and self-reliance. Personality traits can be viewed on a continuum. For example, in shyness, people range from extremely shy to extremely outgoing. Most people are in the middle, and relatively few people are at the extremes of any personality trait. The Big Five. Five-factor theory. This is the idea that personality can be described using five factors: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. If you take the first letter of each of those five factors, it creates the word ocean. O for openness, C for conscientiousness, E for extroversion, A for agreeableness, and N for neuroticism. It's a really easy way to remember the five. For each factor, there is a continuum from low to high. Each factor is a higher order trait that is made up of interrelated lower order traits. The Big Five emerge across cultures, among adults and children, even when vastly different questionnaires assess the same factors. People's scores on the Big Five traits have been shown to predict a wide variety of different behaviors, as well as their satisfaction with their jobs, their marriages, and life generally. The Big Five approach currently dominates much of the way psychologists study personality. The acronym OCEAN is a good way to remember these terms, as I previously mentioned. Traits have a biological basis. Much like the studies demonstrating thousands of small effects of genes on personality, it is likely that multiple brain areas influence how personality develops and is expressed. Patterns such as these demonstrate that the Big Five factor can be reliably distinguished based on patterns of brain activity. Biological trait theory. A psychologist named Eysenck developed the biological trait theory of personality. Eysenck initially proposed that personality traits had two major dimensions: introversion versus extroversion, and emotional stability. Psychoticism was added later and reflects a mix of aggression, poor impulse control, self-centeredness, and a lack of empathy. More recent conceptions of this trait is called constraint. Eysenck proposed that personality traits are based on the biological processes that produce behaviors, thoughts, and emotions. Eysenck believed that differences in arousal produce the behavioral differences between extroverts and introverts. Arousal, or alertness, is regulated by the reticular activating system, RAS. According to Eysenck, personality is composed of traits that occur in three dimensions: extroversion versus introversion, emotional stability versus neurotic, and high constraint versus low constraint, originally called psychoticism. People who are extroverted have lower levels of arousal. To function optimally, they seek out exciting activities. By contrast, people who are introverted have higher levels of arousal. To function optimally, they seek out calming activities. Behavioral activation and inhibition systems. Psychologist named Gray proposed that personality is rooted in two motivational functions: the behavioral approach system and the behavioral inhibition system. The behavioral approach system, BAS, is the brain system involved in the pursuit of incentives or rewards. It's known as the GO system. Behavioral inhibition system, or BIS, is the brain system that is sensitive to punishment and therefore inhibits behavior that might lead to danger or pain, otherwise known as the STOP system. Here's an incredibly simplistic graphic to help you understand this concept. The BAS is linked to extroversion. Extroverts are more likely influenced by rewards than by punishments and tend to act impulsively in the face of strong rewards, even following punishment. The BIS is linked to neuroticism. People high in neuroticism become anxious in social situations in which they anticipate possible negative outcomes. Different brain regions involved in emotion and reward underlie the BIS-BAS systems. People sometimes are inconsistent. Situationism is a theory that behavior is determined more by situations than by personality traits. A psychologist named Michel had a critique of personality traits caused considerable rifts between social psychologists who emphasize situational forces and personality psychologists who focus on individual dispositions. The vigorous response to Michel's critique has come to be called the person-situation debate. Personality researchers argued that how much a trait predicts behavior depends on three factors: the centrality of the trait, the aggregation of behaviors over time, and the type of trait being evaluated. A person might understandably be shy during a first date with someone that they met online, and that same person might be far from shy in a different situation among their friends. Person-situation interaction. Personality psychologists differentiate between strong situations and weak situations. Strong situations, for example, elevators, religious services, and job interviews, tend to mask differences in personality because of the power of social environment. Weak situations, for example, parks, bars, and one's home, tend to reveal differences in personality. Interactionism is a theory that behavior is determined jointly by situations and underlying dispositions. A reciprocal interaction occurs between a person and the social environment so that they simultaneously influence each other. Personality reflects a person's underlying disposition, the activation of a person's goals in a particular situation, and the activation of a person's emotional responses in the pursuit of those goals. Development and life events alter personality traits. How much can or do people change over time? There's a series of documentary films called the Up series. The striking aspect of these films is the apparent stability of personality over time. Because they followed those people for a long amount of time, they saw that a person was a certain way when they were younger, and that followed through and stayed amazingly consistent. Most traits are stable. Continuity over time and across situations is inherent in the different definition of trait. And most research finds personality traits to be remarkably stable over the adult lifespan. Most research finds personality traits to be relatively stable over the adult lifespan. Basic tendencies are dispositional traits determined largely by biological processes and are very stable. Characteristic adaptations are adjustments to situational demands, tend to be somewhat consistent because they are based on skills, habits, and roles. Overall, personality appears to be relatively stable, especially among adults, with stability of situations likely contributing to the stability of personality. This graph shows the rank ordering of the study participants' personalities. Participants ranged in age from newborn to 73. Consistency, as you can see in this graph, is lowest in childhood and highest after age 50. And this concludes part 1 of the lecture. Be sure to listen to part 2 of the lecture.